Right guys, what are we going to be doing today? Well, instead of a playthrough, or a game playthrough, I thought I would discuss a few things to do with settings. Now, I know the bulk of the people playing ArmA at the moment are currently playing Dayz. Heck, I am. But I've been playing ArmA for a great many years. So I have some background, if you like. And I thought I would have a little look through some of the options. First thing I'm going to have a quick look at is player profile. This also affects Dayz. Now you see my real name is there. That is the one that the game creates when you install the game, because that's what my login is on my Windows account. You know, that's my name. But I always play under the pseudonym of Pendragon or Pendragon UK, so I've created a new one. So let's have a little look at this. And we'll edit this one. Now, player name, that's obvious, but face. Did you know you can change your face in the game? The number of various faces that are available to you within the game is dependent on how many of the expansion packs you own. So, there will be faces that are available to me that aren't available to you. I personally like this sort of 70s mustachioed bloke, but you can change your face. Most people you see play with the default face, but there's all sorts of ones here. There's loads and loads of different faces in the game, and because I've got all of the expansions, I've got lots now. Can I find? Yep, I found that one. So there's that. Speaker, male. There are different voices. You can change the pitch. This doesn't have a terrible effect on Dayz, to be honest, because your character never really says anything. But it's to do with ArmA. Now, this is a funny little thing: squad URL. This has to be done somewhere else on a different website, and it's a file that contains information because it takes your player ID and puts information into game. There are more things you can do with faces, including having a file and calling that file in and having a unique face, but sometimes a server won't like that. Okay, so the player profile. At the very least, set up a name that you're happy other people. I mean, I see people joining servers and it's like Windows 7, you know, or system admin, or, you know, normally within gaming world you don't use your real name. You can use your real name, but a lot of people don't. It's, I know it's an old thing, goes back to the old days. But anyway, let's have a look at other options. Game options. The amount of blood you're going to see in the game. But the interesting one are these two down here. Head bob. This is basically your head moving up and down as you run. If you have it set high, the look you get is you've got this bobbing movement up and down. So I turn it right off, so that when you run, the camera or your view doesn't bob up and down. Aiming dead zone, that's a little more difficult to explain. I think what I'm going to have to do for both head bob and aiming dead zone is quickly go into a game. Okay, I'm back again. Right, what I did is I quickly went into the armory. So, we're in the game. Oh, sorry about the challenge alerts. Oh, go away. Disable all. So, here's my character. Now, let's see if I can go into options, game options. Head bob's around there. Let's accentuate it up to here. Stand up. Do you see my? Ooh, do you see the way my head is moving around? I shall run now. It's all jerky, jerky, bump, 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 bump with every movement. Options, game options. Head bob down to 0. Now when I run, the image is stable. Can you see the difference there? So options, game options, head bob. See, so it's all bobbing up and down. So, if you don't want to get seasick whilst you're moving around, you'll set your head bob to 0. Now, aiming dead zone, this is a little, when you start the game, it's there. Let's have a little look at that. Now, I'm looking forward, and I'm going to aim at that tree, and then I'm going to swing to the left and aim at the other tree, and then to this one over here. If we go back, can you see that my character is repositioning as I turn? Which makes me lower my weapon. So as I move, my character is turning. I'm not spinning on the spot. So, if we go in and have a look at game options, and we increase aiming dead zone, this is my ability to move my weapon around without my character moving. Can you see? It's hard to tell the difference between what's happening there, but I've got this sort of square where I can move my weapon around without me moving my entire character around. So that's aiming dead zone. Personal preference on this one, I tend to have it around there. Okay, so that's those two things in game option. Now let's have a little look. Audio. I have the radio turned right off, and I have music off. This is because I have this set up for recording videos. Having the music on makes Dayz a little more atmospheric. Radio doesn't. There are no radios in Dayz. It's not used, so it's not really important. Your VON, which is your talking in game, and your microphone, yeah, you can play with this, because don't forget, even on a hardcore server, you can talk to someone if they're within about 50 to 70 meters of you, and that is talking, and they'll get direction if they've got obviously stereo, but if they've got 7.1 or 5.1 surround, they'll be able to tell where you are from the way you speak to them, and that's direct communication. There's not that great a deal in here, you know how to set that up, but here's the tricky one. What do you do with this lot? Because this is where ArmA it's a real bugger on your computer. I have this set up, it is reasonably high. It is set up like this because it's set up for me to doing my recording. I am recording right now, obviously. I'm playing the game, but I'm recording. And Fraps is telling me that my computer is running this at 60 frames per second. I have a friend who has a reasonably powerful computer, and whenever I mention how fast my computer is running, he gets very upset. Because, seriously, this game is an absolute nightmare. And it's not your graphics card. Seriously, guys, it's the CPU. It's all about CPU. CPU is very important. RAM is very important. And the speed of the RAM, not the amount. And the speed of hard drives as well. So I'm running off a solid state. I've got 16 gig of RAM, and it's running at 2133. And I'm running a Sandy Bridge E Extreme 6-core Intel running at 4.5 gigahertz. So, oh yeah, and I've got a pair of 7970s. I've got a pretty high-end machine. I still don't have this completely maxed out, especially because I'm recording on Fraps. So, things to look out for. Visibility. Ordinarily in visibility is very important in ArmA. It's how far, can you see the fog coming in? It's how far it's going to draw the world. Obviously, the further you're pushing your view distance out, the harder it is for your computer. There is a limit at about 3 kilometers where the game doesn't produce trees at all. But in Dayz, not terribly important, because Dayz has the view distance set to about 1 kilometer, if I remember rightly, something like that. So if you're having performance issues in Dayz, try bringing that down to, say, 500 meters. I mean, let's think about it. You're on foot dodging zombies. you don't need to see very far. So if you're having performance issues, you could probably bring that down a little bit. I leave it around there for me, because my system can take it. Now we have over here on this side the very high. I wouldn't bother with messing with that. What happens is that tends to get pre-selected on what you're doing over here. The interface resolution, you should really keep this one to the screen resolution. Now I've got a 1080p monitor, so I run it at 1920 to 1080 32. This is an interesting one. This is very unusual. Most 3D games don't include this. This is your 3D resolution, and most unusually for a computer game, you can do that independently of the screen resolution. Ordinarily in a 3D game, the two things are locked together. ArmA allows you to separate them, and if I remember rightly, when you first start the game up, it's normally around there. We shall wait for that to come back. Do you notice everything's got a little bit fuzzy? But I tell you what, your frame rate will jump up, because you're asking your computer to do less work. Now, I actually have mine set a little high. I'll explain that in a minute when we go down to here. One thing to remember with ArmA is normal is normal. Okay? I will stick this all on normal. It'll take a little time for the computer to respond. And I walk around, and you know what? It doesn't look very different. This is completely playable. There's no issue playing this. This is actually UTs. UTs is a map that is designed to be slightly smaller scale, but it's also very, very easy on your computer. We look at something that's detailed. Yeah, it's not bad, is it? Is that bad? You can definitely tell a zombie from a lamppost, so I don't think that's too bad. That's normal. Normal is normal. Don't get upset just because you've got a powerful computer and you think, oh, I can run this game really, really high settings, and then get upset because you can't. So that's the first thing to remember. Now, I can, with my computer, run it all pretty much on very high. That's a killer. That's probably the shadow detail. That's the one that's going to make your computer fall over. Because this thing really does. It works out every single shadow. I'll talk about post-processing separately. Just want to talk about that separately. So, here we are. Now, my frame rate's dropped to 30. And we look at this, and yeah, it wasn't that one I was looking at, was it? It was this one. That does look nicer, doesn't it? That's on very high. The difference between normal and very high, you can see the texture detail, is much better. But even with a rig as powerful as mine, it's slowing down a bit. Can you also notice quite how far out the grass is still being rendered? So let's have another look. Let's set this back a little more realistically. Oops. Helps if I hit the buttons. That's pretty close to how it was when I started. Okay, let's talk about some of the special ones, the things that need talking about. Video memory. Let's not forget this game was written a couple of years ago, and it's built on technology that's ancient. When they were designing this game computers probably like the computer you have at home and the computer I'm running didn't exist. No one even thought they could exist. So the amount of video memory, these actually equate to numbers, and they're relatively low. By putting it on default, you're forcing the game to actually detect how much video RAM you have. Now in my case I've got 3 gig. It'll never use, this is the other thing about a quirk about the game, it never uses those 3 gig, it wouldn't know what to do with them. It's just like the computer, this game doesn't know how to address anything over 4 gig of RAM. It doesn't know how to handle anything more than 4 processors. That came out a few years ago, being able to handle multiple processors. There was a time when this game was really dedicated to a single processor, but now it handles 4. So, video memory, everybody, stick it on default. You know when you're pushing this game too hard, because what will happen is the screen will go black. If you're pushing the textures too high, the screen will go black and you'll get the word refreshing appearing. Okay, we're back. Right, now, here's the thing about when you've been playing for a long time, the screen will go black. As I say, it's normally a sign that you're pushing your graphics a little too hard, and it's a memory leak. Now, some game makers, when you tell them their game has a memory leak, they get most upset. They say, no, it hasn't. And others say, it's a bug, it's a feature, learn to live with it. Well, the guys at Bohemia Interactive are very clever people. They'll give you a tool to get rid of it. Now, there is a particular keyboard routine that you have to go through to flush your video RAM. So, I'm going to describe it and do it while I describe it. Holding the left-hand shift key, the minus key on the numero pad at the extreme right-hand side at the same time, then we type the word flush. And the screen goes black, and it says flush activated. And what that does is it flushes your video RAM out. If you've been playing for a long time, you might want to give that a go. Particularly useful if you're in a town or a city where all hell's breaking loose and your frame rate's dropping through the floor. I'm going to see if I can find something on this map to try and show you some of the reason why things sometimes go a bit slow. But yeah, flushing the video RAM, always a useful thing. This is the business of the shadow detail too high. Bushes kill frame rate. Look at those individual leaves, yeah? And the shadows they're casting. Not a particularly good one. Let's see if I can find a bush with individual leaves like that. Because bushes, they kill your frame rate. But with these shadows, this grass is actually laying shadows if you have it on the high setting. Do you see that sharp line there? If you had your terrain detail higher, that would smooth out or round off. But shadow can kill your frame rate as well. So let's have a little look at this bush over here. See the way it's filling in, textures popping in and changing as you get closer. We look at that, it looks pretty good. Now let's options, video options, shadow, very high. And that has chugged my computer down to, I've lost half my frame rate. As the game attempts to figure out where the shadow, how good the shadow is. Shadows really are evil when it comes to this. Oops, wrong one. Video options. And of course, if we turn it to normal, you end up with these blocky shadows. It's just saying, this is a bush, there is a bush shadow behind it. It's not attempting to shade each one. And I know someone who does, in fact, turn shadows off. The world becomes a less interesting place, but gosh, your frame rate will jump up. Turn shadows off. That will make your frame rate jump up because it doesn't have to try and figure out where all those shadows are. Now, I was going to explain post-processing. This is purely personal preference on my part. I hate it. Absolutely hate post-processing. I can run it, there's not a problem. But it makes the edges of the screen, let's get away from the C, where it's actually, let's just turn the C down, shall we? Options, audio options. Yeah, it doesn't negatively affect my performance greatly. I just don't like it. It looks... ooh, it's almost nausea-inducing. I mean, it makes the game... I don't know, it's like a soft focus. And that's great if we were playing a movie, but we're not in a movie, we're playing a game, and my life doesn't have soft focus on it. It's all... when I look at stuff, it's all crisp and hard. I don't have soft focus eyes. So, yeah, I turn it off. Personal preference. If you like it, that's not a problem. It's quite useful for disguising some... you turning the rest of your settings down, for instance. So you can turn some of your other settings down, turn post-processing up. The overall effect will be quite nice. But personal preference, I do not like post-processing. Now, let's have a little look at some of the newer features. Again, if you are relatively new to ArmA, these won't be new, but they are ATOC and PPAA. And I'll also explain why I don't run anti-aliasing. ATOC. It makes things bushy. Let's see if this is going to work. That's anyway. Chuffing use at all. Hang on. Options. Video options. Oh, it's disappeared. Everything. Now I've had this before. Hang on. It doesn't set video options. No, it's turned off. Maybe because it's anti-aliasing, it's turned off. But yeah, personal preference, I don't like it. Again, that's a personal preference. It's nothing to do with whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea. Personally, I don't like it. That's fine. Personal preferences. Now, anti-aliasing. Why do I have anti-aliasing turned off? Well, here's a little quirk. I'm running ATI or AMD graphics cards. It's my experience with this game, and it doesn't like anti-aliasing very much. It'll do it, but it doesn't like it. Dips my frame rate. And you know what? Can't tell the difference. So I turn it off. Now, if you're running an NVIDIA graphics card, don't worry about it. Run your anti-aliasing wherever you feel comfortable. The way I get around it is by doing this, by having my 3D resolution high. Basically what's happening is you're getting like a whole screen anti-aliasing going on. So by running my 3D resolution higher than 100% and my anti-aliasing off, it's much the same as running 3D resolution at 100% with anti-aliasing on. It just happens that my AMD graphics cards handle it better. So again, that's personal preference. Now what I do is I play the... sorry, I was going to mention PPAA. This again is new. Again, the difference is if you're running NVIDIA, play with these ones, the FX. If you're running AMD, play with the SMs. You'll figure it out. But here's the thing that I do. Once I've got all this played with, and I think I've got it about right, let's come out of here, continue, and back, and quit. I always run one of the benchmarks. And this, once you set this out, so you'll find it in scenarios, and what you do is you run this benchmark here, number 1, and we're going to run it. And this is a pre-described or setup with a panning camera. And one of the things I do is I'm running fraps, which tells me my FPS while I do it. So I just realised I'm going to run a benchmark whilst I'm frapping. Fraps, by the way, normally halves your frames per second. It's not doing too bad considering I'm using fraps. This is where your view distance makes a massive, massive difference. But this is a little routine. It'll do pretty much the same thing every time. There's slight deviation. Sometimes something will blow up, sometimes it won't. But your frame rate, this should transition nicely. And you're looking to have this benchmark run somewhere around 50 frames per second. Somewhere between 40 and 50 frames per second. If you can play with your graphic settings to such a level, turning things down, turning things up, pulling the view distance in, that's the real killer, pulling that view distance in, and get this to run at the end where it comes up and tells you it's somewhere between 40 and 50 frames per second, I reckon you're doing pretty good. That will play Dayz really quite well. Now, I'm afraid if you can't get Dayz to run at, or get this to run at about 50 frames per second, then yeah, life's going to be hard. But you really have got to drop those settings. The view distance is a real kicker, but I'm not entirely sure whether or not you can pull the view distance in close enough to give you a performance gain, because I think in Dayz the view distance is set by the game, or set by the server. You can see my view distance is actually beyond the distance of those trees. So we're going to do that, and it's going to come up. Now that said 30, it says 38, but let's not forget, boys and girls, I am running fraps now. And I think that's reasonably good, to be able to run the fraps and still have that come up at 38. Now, this benchmark is evil. This has almost nothing to do with your graphics cards. This is all to do with your CPU performance. And yeah, even I only get about, I don't know, 19 frames per second on that one. That is really evil. This benched out mark down here is the Pakistan one. I find that if I get the first benchmark I ran to run at around 40 to 50 frames per second, this one will run at around 70 frames per second. Pakistan, they learned quite a few tricks. Obviously this map came out after Cherna. It has less detail, there are less trees. Only the valleys have trees, where it's the other way around, or you know, there are trees pretty much everywhere in Cherna, where in Pakistan there tends to only be trees in the valleys. But there's more going on in this one. So this is a little more CPU intensive. But it's quite fun. But as I say, the Cherna benchmark, I would be aiming somewhere between 40 and 50 frames per second. This benchmark, 60 to 70 frames per second, would be more satisfactory. There are things where if you go into the cities in Electro or into Cherno, your frame rate will drop. I mean, my frame rate drops to about 40 in those places where in a wood it's running at 70 or 80, and out in an open field it'll be doing sort of like 100. When I'm on the Pakistan map, my frame rate on those settings that you saw earlier tends to be anything between 200 and I think the lowest I think I've ever seen is about 60 if you go into Zargabad. But this is almost finished. Looks pretty nice. As I say, I'm running a benchmark with fraps running, which is silly, to be honest, and it doesn't actually give you any great idea of what's going on. But I'm just padding now because I know it's about to end in about 10 seconds. A little longer than 10 seconds though. Maybe I should have counted. There we go. That's just coming to an end. That also says 38 frames per second. Again, I think that has more to do with fraps than it does anything else. So when it comes to the benchmarks, what I do, as I say, is that I will play with my video options, just making sure I haven't made any glaring mistakes with those. Play with my video options, make a change, then go single player, scenario, and run that benchmark. the first one. This one, yeah. If you get into double figures, well, if you get anything, I'm trying to remember now. When I had an AMD Phenom 2 running at 4 gig, the 6-core one, I used to get around 13, 14 frames per second. I now get about 20, and that's with a monstrously powerful CPU. So, yeah. That was our quick look at the options. I'm going to see if I've just have a quick check through to make sure I haven't missed anything. We've mentioned aiming dead zone. We've mentioned head bob. Again, personal taste. If you like the head bob, that's fine, but everybody I've told about it think it's amazing that you can turn it off. Controls, I haven't mentioned anything controls, because basically I run everything exactly the way it was set up to do, and the reason for that is every blooming control or button on your keyboard is used. If you start messing with this, you can tie yourself in knots. You really can, because every key on the keyboard is used. When you go to select a different one, you'll be using, yeah, it's easier to learn the default setup for keys than it is to try and set them up the way you like, because you'll be there forever and you'll get lost. And I had a guy in the clan who likes to change his setup on every game he plays, and then he'd say, how do I do such and such? And he'd say, what's this key? He says, oh, I've changed my settings. I said, well, then I haven't got a Scoobies what key you set it to. We had things where two things were happening at once. So anyway, don't mess with the controls. Audio, again, I have the radio off and music off. This is to do with the fact that I'm recording these things. Let's turn those up a little bit, but
cannot fire.
You can see why I have
Cannot
the music
fire.
off. Leave those on, but it's the video options. Go through these again. View distance doesn't mean bugger all if you're playing Dayz because it's set by the game. I didn't bother mentioning brightness and gamma. You should know how to work those out. If you're playing at night, you might want to turn your brightness up. Texture detail, I have mine set to high, but really, guys, don't get upset. Most people should really be running at normal. A lot of you are going to be running at low. The higher these are, the more stress there will be on your video RAM. Anyone with a graphics card that was built in the last 3 years, that is a gaming graphics card, wants to put their video memory on default. If you are trying to run this game on a laptop, or you're trying to run this on something with built-in embedded graphics, then yes, you're going to have to play with this one. But if you're running this game on any graphics card, gaming graphics card that was made in the last 5 years, just stick it on default, because your graphics memory is probably higher than the very highest one that's pre-described. So run it on default, let the game discover how much graphics RAM you have. Anisotropic filtering, personal choice. Can your computer handle it at high, medium, low, or whatever, or disabled? Don't be frightened to turn these things off. It doesn't actually make much difference. You know, just turned it off. I can't tell any difference. God, it makes you wonder why I even run it. So, personal choice. These are the things you change. ATOC. Some people like it, some people hate it. Personally, I hate it. Again, personal choice. Terrain detail. Again, these set on high will have an effect on video memory. If you've got reasonable frame rates, but you discover every half an hour the screen goes black, drop your settings. You're running into video memory issues. So, again, you play with these. Over here, this must be, or not must be, should be the resolution of your monitor. Not interface resolution, God. Needs to be set to your monitor 3D resolution. I have mine set higher. If you've got a powerful computer, you can set it higher, but if you haven't, you can set it lower. So, hopefully, I haven't repeated myself far too many times, you've got an idea of some better things. If you're having problems, drop us a line. There are many, many posts on the subject. A lot of people get very upset with this game because it does not run as well as they like to think it should, you know. I know I did. I got very upset with that my hardware that could run any game I wanted at maximum settings can't run. I mean, for instance, I run Battlefield 3 on Ultra, 120 to 140 frames per second with this computer. I run this game, I do not run it at maximum settings. That gives you an idea of how painful this game is for your hardware, and it is primarily CPU, not graphics card. So, that's your lot, boys and girls. Hopefully I haven't rambled on for too long, and I will talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, another day.